Representatives. And I'm joined, as you can see, by many of my Texas Democratic colleagues from the House of Representatives, who are, I think several of them at least, are going to speak today. And we are very proud and glad to welcome the state representatives and state senators, Democrats from Texas, who fought the Republican voter suppression bill, SB 7 in Texas, and helped beat back voter suppression across the country by highlighting the fact that Republicans really no longer try to win elections with ideas or good governance. They're trying to win elections by keeping people from voting. And that's what we saw in Texas. And it was also a stark reminder of the job that's left to be done in Congress in passing H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 through the Senate and getting those bills to the president's desk. As I said before, this is a now or never moment for American democracy. Either we're going to protect people's right to vote and protect the rule of law in our democracy, or we're going to concede it to people like Donald Trump and others who would run all over the American people and strip people of their right to vote. And so we're excited to have the Texas Democrats here. As y'all know, those of you that have been following their movements today know that they met with Chuck Schumer, the majority leader. They also were part of the Senate Democratic lunch. They had a meeting with Speaker Pelosi and members of the Texas Democratic delegation, and they'll talk about those meetings and what came out of them. But for now, let me introduce my colleague from Fort Worth, Marc Veasey, Congressman Marc Veasey.
Joaquin, thank you very much. I'm Marc Veasey, Congressman for the 33rd Congressional District in Fort Worth and Dallas. And want to thank my colleagues for being here today, and want to thank my former colleagues that are here from the Texas legislature that had the courage to stand up and fight this really bad voter suppression bill. Several Congresses ago, I started the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus, and I chair the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus because I knew that this day would come, that we would face perhaps the worst setback of voting rights that we've seen since the 1960s, before the Voting Rights Act was passed, and that it would start in Texas, and that most of the suppression, the really hard stuff, will be coming right out of the Lone Star State. I think it's an embarrassment and it's a disgrace, and I think that's really why the people that are standing behind me and beside me today are really heroes, because they're helping save democracy for black and brown people all across our state. And when you look at redistricting, for instance, and you look at who's been fueling the growth in the state of Texas, it has been people that are brown and black and Asian. But yet the Republicans want to continue to draw all of the seats for themselves on the backs of the voters that we represent. And this voter suppression bill that they were trying to pass through, it was to try to not only force those individuals that I just talked about into bad districts, it was also trying to make it impossible for them to vote. And we can't have that in our state. We can't have that in our country. And so now is the time for us to pass H.R. 1 and for us to pass H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which will help bring pre-clearance back to the Lone Star State. And look, I can go back and say, I can say a lot, but we have votes right now. But for the people that are making up Texas today, making up the growth in Texas today, this bill silences their voice. This bill that these brave legislators are trying to stop from happening, it silences their voice, and we need to help them on Capitol Hill. They need federal protection right now before it's too late. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris Turner from. I'm going to turn it over to Speaker Nancy Pelosi and ask Madam Speaker to come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I came to hear Chris and Senator Alvarado, and I'm honored to be here with these American patriots. With their courage and their action, they have supported our democracy. I wrote to my colleagues yesterday in the House and to say that the clock was ticking on our democracy when it came to the sanctity of the vote. I thank Congressman Veasey and Castro, Joaquin Castro, for inviting our friends here today and for enabling me to hear their and be inspired by their story. The whole country was inspired when it took place, but to hear the particulars of it and to be able to congratulate them. So I know we're here with the Chris Turner from the lower house, what do you call it? The House of State House, and Senator Alvarado from the State Senate, and the chair of the Black Caucus, Nicole Collier, and Raphael Raphael Achia, the chair of the Mexican American Caucus, correct? Yes. But all of them, each and every one of them, have been champions for our democracy. Yvonne, where's Yvonne? Yvonne led the charge, right?
That's what they say.
But here's the thing: when we hear the story that they tell, it's a sad story that others in our country who have a responsibility to take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution just do the opposite and undermine the rights of people to vote. But their story is not unique. It's what's happening across the country. 19 states have legislation put forth to diminish the ability for people to vote by mail. The list goes on in so many things. 27 states have light laws that make it harder to vote because of ID requirements. 17 states expanding purges, and 8 states have bills to eliminate the facility to register, whether it's same day, earlier voting. But in the Congress, we have the antidote to all of that. In many cases, many of the specific cases, whether it's assistance for voting or whether it's vote by mail, or many of the provisions in the Senate 7, the Texas bill, are corrected by what is in H.R. 1. But they even go beyond, talking about how they can overturn elections and get rid of poll workers who are there. This is an all-out assault, an all-out assault. I mean, it's just really hard to understand how they could cook up so many various ways to come at a person's right to vote, but they did. And in H.R. 1, we have a correction for most of that, but not all. And then in H.R. 4, we go even further. And when that bill is ready, because it must withstand the constitutional review in an ironclad way, because that Supreme Court was not friendly to the Voting Rights Act when it passed the Shelby decision. And so we have to be even stronger in how we do H.R. 4. So that will take a few more weeks before we can get around to that bill. In the meantime, H.R. 1 has protections in it that are very important for Texas, and even some protections in lieu of the pre-clearance legislation that we'll have in H.R. 4, more than you maybe want to hear about right now, but all of which very important. When you think of the vision that our founders had about a democracy, when you think of what our men and women in uniform do to protect our freedom, when you think of what we owe our children as they go into the future for this democracy, you know that we cannot rest until we get the job done. And in this fight, we have our country has not been better served by the courage than by the courage of our friends from Texas. Their visit to the Capitol brings honor to the Capitol. I'm pleased to welcome them and thank them for their courage and for their patriotism. With that, now I yield to the distinguished Chris Turner from where's Chris?
He's right behind.
Where's Chris?
Thank you.
There you are, Chris. I'll change places with you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Speaker Pelosi, for welcoming us and for your very kind words and for your leadership for our nation in standing up for democracy. You've been doing that your entire career, and we all owe you a debt of gratitude, so thank you. And thank you to our outstanding Texas Congressional Delegation, Congressman Castro and Congressman Veasey, who you've already heard from, and all the members of Congress who are here, who fight hard for our state and for our nation every single day. We thank all of you. And I'm so proud to be with my colleagues from the House and the Senate. It's the 80 Democrats in the House and the Senate who stood shoulder to shoulder and fought all session long against a host of divisive Republican policies, the worst of which was this vote suppression bill that became SB 7. And I think our message up here today is pretty simple. We thank the U.S. House of Representatives under Speaker Pelosi's leadership for passing H.R. 1. We thank the Senate Democrats who are determined to get it passed as well. We thank President Biden and Vice President Harris for their leadership. And we need their help now, because the Republican attempt to suppress the vote in Texas, and we see it playing out across the country, is not going to stop. It is a diabolical attempt to make it harder for American citizens to cast a ballot in an election. And it is wrong. It is undemocratic. It is anathema to what our country is supposed to be based upon, the bedrock principle of one person, one vote. And Republicans will stop at nothing. And we know this in Texas. Our Republican leadership is determined to make it harder to vote. They have done it repeatedly over the last decades through suppressive voter laws in the past, through discriminatory redistricting plans. And we need Congress and the President to pass and enact into law H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 to finally put an end to this, so all Americans and all Texans have an equal opportunity to participate in our nation's democracy. That's our message, and we are here to offer our help in any way we can to spread that message and to encourage our federal partners to get this done as soon as possible. And I think I'm going to turn it over now to my counterpart in the state Senate, the chair of the Senate Democratic Caucus from Houston, Senator Carol Alvarado.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to Congressman Veasey and Castro, our former members in the Tex Ledge, and to all of our members of the Texas delegation. Look, what we've seen in Texas has been the most divisive, most partisan, mean-spirited piece of legislation that we have seen, I think, in our lifetime. It is a solution in search of a problem. It is a Congressman Green, you know this saying, it's a well-dressed lie chased by the naked truth, okay? Because there is no fraud. But what we witnessed with the development of this bill, the way it left the Senate, then went to the House, and then went to conference, it went from a 71-page bill to a 226-page committee report with provisions in there that were in neither bill from either chamber. This was done in a most non-transparent way. It was done without any input from Democrats in the Senate. In the House, there was some limited participation. But as far as the Senate goes, it was done without any. We are seeing an attack on voting rights when it comes to communities of color, Latinos, African Americans, and Asians, women, the disabled, and the elderly. Being from Harris County, we know that Harris County was one of the major reasons for this bill, because our local officials came up with a safe way for people to vote during the pandemic. Drive-through voting brought a record number of people, and we had over 53% of Latinos and African Americans and Asians that used that mechanism to vote. We had 24-hour voting that brought out 10,000 people to vote. And of that, 56% were of people of color, 60% women. So that's what we're talking about here. It's a slap in the face. It's about as blatant as you can get. And what our ask here today is that we need legislation passed in the Congress. We thank our members here who have done their part and for what the members in the Senate are hoping to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Alvarado. Next, I'd like to call on Representative Nicole Collier.
State Representative Nicole Collier.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the recognitions for all the members of Congress that are here. Madam Speaker Pelosi, thank you so much. You know, we came here because the future of Texas voting depends on action from Congress. We are grateful for the measures that have been filed, that are being pushed by the legislature. But as chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, I can tell you our members know too well the assault that has been placed upon our community. We know when they talk about preserving the purity of the ballot box, we know exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about reinstating measures that would be similar to poll tax, literacy tests, empowering partisan poll watchers to film our voters, to film voters. We're talking about legislation that would allow them to criminalize minor mistakes. This is what we saw in this bill. We even saw where they required people to indicate the type of disability that they have before they can qualify for a mail-in ballot. So we know the lengths that they will go, and there is no limit on what they will do to stop our people from voting, to limit the voting, to disenfranchise people. So we are here because we need federal intervention. The For the People Act will be a great complement and start to stopping this assault on our rights. And so we are asking the Senate to stop the filibuster, take up For the People Act, and move forward. And we're just so grateful for the opportunity to have our voices heard, to provide context to all the members of the Senate that were there today, to allow them to hear our voice. We are grateful for Congress, for the House, the United States House, Speaker Pelosi, for giving us that stage and opportunity to share our stories with them. And so we will continue. We will continue to press on, and we have hope. We have hope that they will take action before they finalize that assault on our rights. So thank you again. We're grateful to be here, and we will continue to push and fight to preserve the rights of our constituency. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Collier. I know the members of the Congressional Delegation are going to speak in just a minute. We do have votes going on, but I want to give a few of our guests from Texas, a few more guests to have an opportunity to speak. Next, I'd like to call on Rafael Anchia, State Representative from Dallas and Chairman of the Mexican American Legislative Caucus.
Gracias a mi amigo Joaquin Castro, ex miembro de la Cámara de Diputados. Para los medios de comunicación en español quiero ofrecer unos comentarios primero en mi primer idioma. ¿Hay medios aquí de habla hispana? Ok, más o menos. Muy bien, muy bien. Pues quiero decir que agradezco mucho la participación de la presidenta de la Cámara de Diputados Federal, Nancy Pelosi, que nos ha dado mucho apoyo durante este proceso. También al jefe del Senado, el líder del Senado, Chuck Schumer. Y pensamos que este es el momento para proteger nuestra democracia. Le quiero ofrecer un contexto breve de mi situación personal. Yo soy un hijo de inmigrantes de este país. Mi madre, que vino de México, donde había solamente un partido, la PRI, por 70 años. Mi padre, que vino de España, después de la posguerra que vivió una dictadura absoluta. Así es que en mi familia, cuando nosotros estamos viendo lo que está ocurriendo en Estados Unidos, tememos mucho por el futuro de este país si no actuamos actualmente. Así es que continuaré en inglés, because I do speak English as well. Well, I did want to point something out, and it's so great to have Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer supporting both Congressional and State Senate and State House members here. We need that type of focus by the country on Texas, because we know what's at stake in this very delicate time frame. My parents are immigrants to this country. My mother came from Mexico that had one-party rule for 70 years. They did not have free and fair elections for a long, long time. My father came from an absolute dictatorship in northern Spain after the war, when one person determined all of the elections. And so when we're talking about voting rights, at this very delicate moment in time, my family and people like me get very, very concerned, because America, that flag that is flying just in front of us represents that beacon of democracy in the world. And if we permit for American democracy to be undermined, we permit for democracy to be undermined worldwide. We cannot let America down. We cannot let the world down. We must fight to stop voter suppression and pass federal bills that will help us in Texas and in the rest of the country. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Representative Anchia. And then two more state representatives, Representative Trey Martinez-Fisher of San Antonio, who was part of a meeting with the Chief of Staff, I believe, or the office of Joe Manchin earlier this afternoon, and then Jessica Gonzalez, and then we'll hear from our congressional delegation.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, everybody. Sorry for my voice. We've been working very hard this week. The men and women who were brave enough to walk off the Texas House floor to break a quorum and deny a discriminatory voting bill was an honorable thing to do, but it is the equivalent of men and women crawling on our knees, begging for a solution, asking our federal brothers and sisters to bring us federal voting rights relief. And so we're honored to be here. As the President mentioned, 30 days of action on voting rights. Well, we're here to do our part. And in part of that is to take a number of meetings. Representative Jasmine Crockett from Dallas and myself had the good fortune to spend 45 minutes in a closed-door meeting with the Chief of Staff, Senator Manchin, and his legislative director. And it was a real meeting. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for all the people that have made time for us. But we really had an opportunity to understand the legislation, understand what the thinking is of Senator Manchin, what the approach is going to be in the coming days, certainly all of his decisions and his timelines, not for me to comment on. But I left there with hope and inspiration and with an offer to come back and meet once again, which Representative Crockett and I will do. But the most important thing everybody in America can do is we were a small spark that reignited a national debate and discussion on voting rights in America. We have brought that spark to our nation's capital, hoping to light a fire in the bellies of our hardworking men and women serving in the United States Senate, the United States Congress. And let's pass H.R. 1, H.R. 4, S1, put it on the President's desk. Let's finish the mission. Let's honor the legacy. Let's get this done. And I think we here in Texas, we're willing to come back on our own nickel to meet with anybody who will meet with us. Because one thing was very clear from that meeting with Senator Manchin's office, voting practices in West Virginia are way different than voting practices in Texas. And once they understood exactly how high these hurdles are and how low that tripwire is to make voting practically a crime in the state of Texas, no voter deserves to go through that. And we need a response, and we need it now. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Gonzalez.
Thank you, and I won't reiterate what my colleagues have said, but I will say that as the Vice Chair of the House Elections Committee, that the intent of this bill by Republicans was made very, very clear from the very beginning. Just deviations from standard practices in committee, to not allowing me to recognize my colleague Chair Collier in committee to ask questions on this bill, considering that there are no members of the African American community that currently serve on the Elections Committee, adding provisions at the 11th hour on the very last day that bills could pass the chamber. It just shows their intent. And so I'm proud of what we did. We stood up for every single Texan. We stood up for your voting rights, and we're not going to stand for this continued attack on our democracy until we have a seat at the table and we can discuss an actual bipartisan piece of legislation. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Representative. And now we'll hear from some of the members of Congress. I think there are about probably 4 minutes left now on the second vote. But I think Al went to vote. Colin here? Colin Allred, Dallas.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend, and I'm so proud to be joined by these brave Texas Democrats. I became a voting rights attorney because of what was happening in Texas. Because in my home state, the right to vote has been under attack for far too long. It was already the hardest state in the country to vote before this bill. The right to vote is sacred. here in this temple of democracy, I was on the House floor when the rioters tried to break in to overturn an election. And that big lie is what led to SB 7. You know, Senator West said it well. I watched him at 2 a.m. on the Senate floor of a holiday weekend. So in Texas, they're trying to make it so you can get a beer at 10 a.m. on a Sunday, but you can't go vote? It's unbelievable. I'm telling you, I've worked in voting rights. This time is different. Hear me when I say this. Making it easier to overturn elections is different. What we are seeing in Texas is different. This is not Democrats and Republicans in the back and forth that so many people have become used to in this country. This is about an attempt to make sure that the will of the people of Texas will never be heard. And we have to act here at the federal level. Now, the House has passed H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and we will pass H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, to restore pre-clearance. We have to have the support of the United States Senate. These folks showed us what's possible when you throw out whatever the rule book may be because you know what's right. We can't allow a Senate rule to stand in the way of our democracy. And I just want to say thank you to these Texas Democrats for their bravery. Thank you for being here and highlighting this issue. We are all in your debt, and we can all learn something from your leadership. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Jackson-Lee.
I'm going to go vote real quick. Here's the list of the main speakers. I'll be back.
Let me thank my good friends, Congressman Castro and Congressman Veasey, and I know that my other colleagues will come back to this state delegation. I will be very pointed. What you stood in opposition to was Jim Crowism returning its ugly head. For those of us who know the leaders that are no longer with us, like Barbara Jordan, who created the Section 5 opportunity for the state of Texas through the language provision, we realize what we have gone through. So take a ride with me down memory lane and realize that when Dr. King moved the signature of Lyndon Baines Johnson, it was because they were willing to march from Selma to Montgomery. They were willing to be brutalized. And yes, as John Lewis, my late dear friend, said, he shed a little blood on that bridge. On May 31st, May 30th, you shed a little blood. And we should never ignore it. And the papers and those throughout the state of Texas has to realize that nonviolently, even though this citadel of democracy was attacked violently by those soaking in the big lie and advocating for untruth across America, our brave Democratic state legislators never wavered, never gave up, and never gave in, and never gave out. We, as members of the United States Congress, even though our voice is a little raspy, must step down. We must step to the right and the left. It is not a partisan issue, but it's a Jim Crow issue. It is an issue where those of color were denied. And I close on this. When the first voter ID law was enacted in Texas, there were at least 8 counties where there was no Department of Public Safety office for Hispanics to even go and vote, most of them Hispanic counties. And so we know what the intent is. To the state legislature, to Governor Abbott, hear our voice. We will not be turned around. We are going to fight and fight and fight and use the mantle of democracy and nonviolence to pass H.R. 1, H.R. 4, and we will speak for the people because the people will not be silenced. Let me ask Congressman Green, here he is, to come forward and to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I love my country and I love my state. But it is said that you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free. And the truth is, Texas has been a bad actor for a long time. It was Texas that gave us Smith versus Allwright. Lonnie Smith was a dentist in Houston, Texas. He wanted to vote in the primary. He could not vote because Texas had an all-white primary. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional. Well, John Terry was living in Fort Bend County. He wanted to vote. He couldn't vote because Texas had gone to, in Fort Bend County, a white pre-primary. The Supreme Court said that is unconstitutional. So this is the latest iteration of Texas in an effort to grab power. It is about voter suppression, but it's also about power. This is a power grab on behalf of those who hold the highest offices in the state of Texas, and we have a duty and obligation and a responsibility to do all that we can to stop the power grab in Texas. And now I'd like to introduce someone who's a part of this avant-garde movement to stop the power grab. The Honorable Royce West, Senator, Dallas. Senator, if you would.
Congressman Green, thank you very much. Madam Speaker, thank you very much for being here. From the beginning to the end, you're here. Thank you very much for doing that. And also Majority Leader Schumer, my colleagues in both the House and the Senate. Let's follow the facts, ladies and gentlemen, just briefly. America is changing. The demographics of America is changing. What you see before you represents that demographic. And these are individuals that are Americans, that have been taught the principles of this country in terms of that you participate in the voting process in order to put people in position, in order to affect policy and obviously appropriation in this country. For some strange reason, when you follow the facts, what you'll see is not only do we have issues concerning voter suppression, we also have critical race theory legislation. We have been here before in the state of Texas. Back in 2003, when we had to fight mid-decade redistricting, we ended up having to use parliamentary procedures in order to try to delay and try to turn back that type of legislation. That was in 2003. And now we find ourselves here in 2021. What we come to Washington for is obviously to pass the two bills that we've talked about, but also asking our colleagues here in Congress to figure out what leverage they have as congresspersons, as leaders in the legislative and executive branch of government, that they can utilize in order to help us get the leverage that we need to make certain that suppressive voter laws are not passed in Texas. The only thing people of color want to do is to participate and make certain that we carry on the legacy of democracy in this country. And that's what we're fighting for, and we will fight and use every tool at our disposal in order to make certain that we're not turned back.
It's now my honor to bring another member from the House of Representatives, the Honorable Lloyd Doggett, who knows what this is all about because he's been through it on many occasions and has had the opportunity to represent a district that has been drawn in many different ways. The Honorable Lloyd Doggett.
Thank you, Al. Right behind you.
Okay, go for it.
So these legislators are clearly Texas tough. They've demonstrated their courage. They've made a difference. But as much as they represent the hope that we have for Texas, unless we establish some uniform national standards, their courage will have been for naught in accomplishing the protection of our democracy that we're seeking. I think it's time to get down and look at the provisions of the For the People Act. Many good provisions, I support them, but to identify those that deal directly with voter suppression of the type that is going on in Texas today, and the issue of political gerrymandering, of which I have some experience, and to center on those. And if there's only one bill that this Congress can pass in this session, the one and most important one is dealing with those issues, political gerrymandering and voter suppression, because the future of our democracy is at stake, as these legislators have indicated. We need to back them up. We need to get to the core of the bill and pass it as soon as possible, because the longer it is delayed, the more likely that some Texas Republican federal judge will say we're interfering in the election and try to put it off to another day. We need action now. We need it in the Senate now. Hopefully the presence of these great, courageous legislators will help us get there. Thank you.
Next person you're going to hear from is Lizzie Fletcher from Houston.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you so much, Congressman Veasey, for bringing us together. I'm delighted to be here with you and to be here with these incredible representatives from the Texas legislature who have come up here to show us in Washington how critical it is that we do everything we can to protect the right to vote for people in Texas and for people across the country. And I'm proud to stand here with them. I'm proud to stand here with my colleagues to say that we are unified. We are a coalition of people from across the state who are going to do everything we can to protect the rights of Texans and all Americans. And the thing is, I had the great privilege when I was a candidate in 2018 to bring Congressman John Lewis to my district in Houston. And the outpouring of people who showed up to meet us everywhere we went demonstrated the importance and also the length of this battle. And it's why I was so proud to be a co-sponsor of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, H.R. 4, and of H.R. 1, the For the People Act. And it's why it's more critical now than ever that we pass those bills, that we continue the work that so many people have fought so hard for so long. It is up to us, and I'm here to tell you that our Texas Congressional Delegation and that members of Congress are committed to continuing this fight and to working, all of us, to restore the Voting Rights Act, to protect the right to vote, and to make clear what is at stake, because there's nothing short of our democracy that is on the line, and we're here to fight for it. And I'm so proud to stand here with these fighters, with these people who have made sure that we are able to do the work we need to do here in Washington, who've given us the time in Texas to protect the rights of Texans. That's what we're all here to do, and I'm proud to be a part of this coalition.
Thank you. Representative Fletcher, thank you very much. That is the last speaker, but and you probably just heard the bell. They've just called the third vote. Are there? We have time for a couple of questions. Did y'all have a couple of questions you want to ask?
Yeah, Congressman, this is for you and for anybody from the Texas delegation.
Okay, please state your.
Ryan Nobles from CNN.
Thank you.
You know, Senator Manchin is clearly the most important player in this, at least from the Democratic perspective. He said that he doesn't support H.R. 1. He's unwilling to move ahead with the filibuster. This group didn't even get an audience with him today. He wasn't in the Democratic conference meeting. He had them meet with his staff instead. Are you disappointed that Senator Manchin didn't offer them the opportunity to at least hear directly from them and instead had his staff meet with them instead?
I know that the majority leader is doing everything he can, that he understands the importance of these bills. I've spoken with the majority leader myself personally and explained particularly to him about Texas and the situation that we're in that's a little bit different than the rest of the country and that we share with about 4 or 5 other southern states plus Arizona. And so, you know, we're focused on getting this done. I think that it's going to be done. I'm very hopeful, but the clock is ticking. We need to do something now.
Somebody from the delegation can answer that?
Let me say this to you also. We are legislators just like our federal counterparts, and we understand how the system works. We had members of our delegation meet with his chief of staff today and kind of give exactly what our position is. And we'll eventually meet with Senator Manchin. You know, just because we didn't meet today doesn't mean that we're not going to meet with him, all right? And so we'll meet with him, and it may be tomorrow. It may not be tomorrow. It may be Thursday. But we will meet with him so he can make certain that he understands, once he's adequately briefed by his chief of staff, of some of the issues that we have and the comparison between his state and our state. We'll meet with him and talk with him about the issues that we have.
Emily Brooks, Washington Examiner. Is this conversation that you're having with the delegation with members of Congress ultimately just about ending the filibuster? If you're trying to get this bill across the line as soon as possible, and if not, are you talking with any Republicans?
You know, this is about voting rights for the constituents that we specifically represent in Texas and trying to stop bad voter suppression bills in our state. I mean, if you look at the growth in Texas, I mentioned before, it's overwhelmingly Hispanic and Black. And, you know, we need to be trying to do everything we can to encourage people to vote. I love what they did in Harris County to make it a lot easier for people to vote, putting things in like 24-hour voting that all people, regardless of if they were Democrat, Republican, Black, white, were able to take advantage of. And so that's what we're here trying to protect today.
I just briefly, my name's Jose Menendez. I'm a senator from San Antonio, state senator. But you know, one of the things that we have to agree is that this is actually to protect everyone's right to vote. Because it doesn't make any sense. It wasn't just Democrats that availed themselves of the drive-through voting in Harris County. It was people of all walks of life. People, doctors, nurses, first responders, people who work late into the night during COVID. I mean, so we're trying to protect everyone's right to vote. And so I think it's evident that there is a hypocrisy when only some rules will apply in urban settings, but they don't apply in rural settings. So this needs I think Senator Manchin, when he finally, he spent 14 years in the legislature in West Virginia. When he hears the details of how bad the legislation was in Texas, I hope he understands that we're not talking about just protecting the rights to vote for Democrats. It's for all Americans. And that's why the federal legislation is so important.
And Senator Byrd was very revered in the U.S. Senate, very revered for his mastery of the rules and understanding of the rules. And even Senator Byrd was for making amendments to the filibuster. So, and I want to remind everybody, in the state of Texas, two things happened. When I was in the state legislature, they passed a rule that said that they were not going to have the filibuster in the state Senate for redistricting or voter ID. And then fast forward, maybe last session, Representative Sheila, I think that the lieutenant governor actually raised the threshold for the filibuster rule, so Democrats couldn't participate in that. So, this is something that people have done. You saw what happened with the Supreme Court and how they even though Mitch McConnell said that you shouldn't put a Supreme Court appointee during an election year, and he put one in October, right before a November election. And so the Republicans are always changing these rules, and we need to look more closely at them, particularly if we can stop people from being discriminated against in places like Texas. Representative Crockett?
You asked about the goal. The goal is to make sure that we protect the right to vote. I don't really care how we get there. If we get there because we get the votes, because we're talking to Democrats and we're talking to Republicans, then that works for me. If we get there because we have to get rid of the filibuster on this specific issue, then that works for me. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all. When we came here with one goal. The reality is that when we killed that bill, there were many approaches that were taken to try to figure out how can we kill this bill. We finally got to the point that we decided that we were going with the nuclear option. I do think that we call it nuclear for a reason. It is to be reserved only for the most intense and most ridiculous times. If we get to the point that we decide that we can't protect our democracy but for getting rid of the filibuster, then that's what we will be calling for. But right now, any option to get us protections is on the table.
Thank you. We have to wrap it up because we have to get the votes, but thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
How long will you all be in town?
Varying time.
Excuse me. You guys made and went through extraordinary measures to prevent restrictive voting laws to pass. You did, as you said, a nuclear option, everything you could to stop it from happening. Do you feel like your federal Democratic partners here in D.C. are doing just as much? Are they doing everything they can?
Absolutely. And they have given us a lot of time. I mean, we've spent a lot of time with the speaker today. And for her to be here, leave, come back, she has been very supportive. So has our majority leader, Chuck Schumer. Some of us have had 2 meetings with him today. So everybody has been extremely supportive and accessible.
And one more follow-up. The other senator that wasn't at that lunch today was Senator Sinema. Are there any conversations about approaching her and seeing if she can jump on board with this?
Yeah, we're talking to everybody.
We're trying to reach out to everybody.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.